but the volcanic activity has begun.
I don't think that anybody, any human on this earth can control Mother Nature. When it decides to do something, it's out of our hands.
Second base, so the Oakland A's take. Tell you what, we're having an earthquake.
One of my ribs had gone into my lung, so I was bleeding out my mouth. You know, I just figured it was over.
Most people go to their utmost to get out of the way of them, but I'll go to the ends of the world to get in the path of these things.
Natural disasters strike fear into us all. Although they are an essential part of the Earth's ecosystem, it's scant consolation for those that are caught in their awesome power. As a meteorologist, I try to predict the awesome force of the weather system. It's as complex as it's beautiful. But there's one natural disaster that comes from deep within the Earth that can't be predicted: the earthquake. During the last millennium, 8 million people died from the power of this natural disaster, which strikes with precious little warning. California, a state where residents live on the edge, knowing that an earthquake could strike at any moment, and making their greatest fear a catastrophic reality. On October the 17th, 1989, Tim Peterson, an off-duty fireman, was driving along the usually crowded Cypress Freeway in San Francisco.
I was out running an errand, and on my way back, I noticed there was no traffic at all. I was doing 65 miles an hour. That was very odd. It was an odd day.
The World Series, America's baseball grand finale, was taking place that day between two neighboring teams, the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants.
Anybody who was going to watch the game left work early because the game started at 5:15 or something.
With the last great quake over 80 years ago, the people of California knew the next big one could be just around the corner. At 5:04 that afternoon, San Francisco's public transport system detected a warning tremor on the ground. 12 seconds later, it shook the outskirts of the city.
I thought I had run over some nails. I thought I had 4 flat tires. So my truck just goes completely out of control.
Second base, so the Oakland A's take. Tell you what, we're having an earthquake.
Measuring an alarming 7.1 on the Richter scale, had struck. The epicenter was in the Santa Cruz Mountains, 80 miles from the city of San Francisco.
We usually get very superficial damage, light quakes all the time. But here was one where I was witnessing actual structural damage occurring to a large building across the street.
Unlike other natural disasters, earthquakes come with little or no warning, which makes their impact even more devastating.
I had no idea that. I didn't even know it was an earthquake till the next day. I just thought something dropped on the truck, and it was huge, and I was buried in there.
Unfortunately for Tim Peterson, the quake shockwaves had made the Cypress Freeway that he was traveling on very unstable.
It looked as if a kid had come in and just knocked over his playset.
The upper level of the freeway had come apart. Massive chunks of concrete had fallen onto the lower road, crushing dozens of cars, including Tim Peterson's.
It was completely crushed down to 22 inches, 2 feet high. If you can imagine, it was just like a pancake. One of my ribs had gone into my lung, so I was bleeding out my mouth, and then the steering wheel had crushed my thighs, 2 broken ribs, broken back, shoulder. I can remember the whole thing.
Although critically injured, Miraculously, Tim was still alive.
In this case, not wearing a seatbelt did save my life. It was a big bench seat, so I was able to fall over onto the passenger side.
But Tim now needed urgent medical assistance.
I could hear sirens off in the distance, but they were stopping, miles away, and nobody was coming to where I was.
Power lines were cut and broken gas mains fed fires that raged across the city.
I'll tell you this now, people are pouring water on themselves. The heat is so intense.
It's been a frightening scene here. As you can see just below me is where this crack in the Bay Bridge occurred, a 50-foot section.
They're not doing a damn thing about getting this thing down here.
We will take every step and make every effort to help the Bay Area in its hour of need.
Prepare for aftershocks. Prepare for 3 days of no services. You got 90 minutes of light left. You better make use of your time.
Mark Hoffman was one of the first firemen to reach the stricken area.
When we got onto the scene and went up the ladder onto the deck, there was an initial reality check for me where I had to think, gee, am I going to kill my whole crew here? I mean, this whole thing's just fallen down. It's going to fall down some more. There's going to be aftershocks. Every earthquake I've ever experienced, there's been subsequent little tremors. I was quite concerned about that, both for my own personal safety and because I was taking, a full crew up there.
As the emergency services struggled to make their way through twisted wrecks of cars and rubble, they faced a terrible dilemma.
A lot of the people we came upon, there'd be no respiration, no pulse, and quickly you'd realize there's no way I can get this person out in a reasonable amount of time. That was part of the triage mission we had, was to rule, unfortunately, okay, let's move on, that we can't save this person.
Meanwhile, Tim Peterson still lay trapped inside his truck.
And I figured I wasn't going to make it. You're a little bit nervous about what it's going to be like. Everybody talks about dying, but nobody really knows what it is like. I knew there was no way to get out.
Just a block away from where we are standing now at 24th and Cypress, rescue crews and excavating company came and they thought that one of their employees was trapped.
Finally, the emergency services found Tim, amazed he was still alive in the rubble. As a complicated rescue began, it was caught on camera by local TV crews.
The second rescue
it was
that
perhaps the
happened right
hardest
here at
extraction
24th and
the fire
Cypress,
service had
it
ever
was another
performed.
man, Tim, who was able to talk to the rescuers the whole time that they were working on him. Two of them told me he had both legs trapped, one on either side of the steering wheel. At one point, he told them, just cut my legs off so you can get me out. And they said, no, we're going to be able to get you out.
They had to go inside and just start smashing the truck up against itself in the freeway and down. And they cut the steering wheel using a small little reciprocating saw.
The Fremont Fire Department brought in the jaws of life. They brought in some heavy equipment, and they were finally able to get him out.
6 hours after the earthquake struck,
that they have
Tim
done all
Peterson
they
was
can do
finally
out
cut
here
free from his
tonight.
crushed vehicle. The section of the Cypress Freeway on which Tim was traveling was the worst hit area by the earthquake. Incredibly, Tim was the only survivor. 42 people lost their lives here, crushed by the impact of falling concrete. The earthquake claimed 67 lives and caused $7 billion worth of damage to the city. The San Francisco earthquake of 1989 remains a significant event in U.S. history. Not only was it the greatest earthquake of its kind to be recorded on camera, it was also a stark warning.
Had it been stop-and-go traffic, where everybody's bumper to bumper, there would have been hundreds of people killed. You kind of wonder, the no traffic, the no seatbelt. I was very unlucky to be there, but lucky all those things lined up, yeah.
The most destructive weather on Earth occurs in the tropics. In January 2003, the worst cyclone in a century was heading towards the inhabitants of a small Pacific island called Tikopia.
There is absolutely nothing that can ever be done to stop cyclones.
Cyclones are among the most powerful and destructive meteorological systems on Earth. Every year the tropics are battered by their force. In the Southwest Pacific, at the little-known island of Tikopia, the residents were completely unprepared for the arrival of Cyclone Zoe.
A cyclone is another term for a typhoon or a hurricane, the different names depending on which region of the world you're from. They essentially act as meteorological air conditioning systems, taking away hot, humid weather from the equator to the cooler polar regions.
Cyclones are the most destructive force of nature on Earth. There is absolutely nothing that can ever be done to stop cyclones.
How most people try to avoid direct contact with such destructive weather systems. Cameraman Jeff Mackley lives for them.
My father has always been very interested in weather, and when we were children and there was a big storm or a flood or lightning, he would take us out in the car to look at it. And I've just had this fascination with weather for a long, long time. Most people go to their utmost to get out of the way of them, but I'll go to the ends of the world to get in the path of these things.
Mackley makes a living capturing on camera some of the world's most extreme meteorological conditions. Little did he know that his desire to be in the wrong place at the right time would shape the future of a Pacific island. In December 2002, while checking his satellite equipment for the latest severe weather systems, Mackley noticed a cyclone developing in the southern Pacific region. Undaunted, Mackley headed for the eye of the storm.
Initially, its target was going to be one of the islands in Vanuatu. It was clear from early on that sea conditions were ripe in that area for a major storm.
But as Mackley flew to the islands of Vanuatu with his camera, the cyclone changed course and now headed towards a small group of Pacific islands.
Cyclone Zoe intensified to a major Category 5 storm and pretty much stalled over Tikopia Island.
As the 200-mile-per-hour wind lashed Tikopia, disappointed, Mackley landed on Vanuatu, now hundreds of miles away from the storm.
I remember joking and saying, "Oh, this island, Tikopia, that'll be getting a hammering. Does anyone live on it?" Nobody knew. Nobody had even heard of it. I was about to get on the plane back home because it hadn't hit anything. And I thought, I'll do a bit of a search on the internet to see if I can find whether anyone lives on Tikopia. And I did a search and I thought, oh, there's 1,500 people live on this island, and immediately put two and two together and thought, this is going to be really, really serious, because this storm was one of the strongest I'd ever heard of.
A day after Cyclone Zoe had struck, the governments of Australia and New Zealand were slow to respond. They claimed that the weather conditions prevented any aircraft from reaching the island of Tikopia. Mackley, however, had other ideas, and he persuaded a local pilot to fly him out to the island in search of survivors.
And we did some crude measurements. We didn't have any instrumentation on the plane at all. We used a marine chart and a ruler, and worked out that it was possible by flying to one of the northernmost islands of Vanuatu. refilling with fuel drums and then doing an overflight of the island and coming back and filling up.
In the end, they successfully navigated the way to Tikopia. Although unable to land on the island, what Mackley saw from the air shocked him.
I expected severe damage because I know what a cyclone of that magnitude was capable of doing, but I was totally unprepared for what I saw. I mean, it looked like Hiroshima. I mean, it was incredible. All the trees on the hills were completely stripped bare of all vegetation to the point where it was just it was like a desert. And we flew around and around the island, going increasingly lower in the plane, and we could see people, because pretty much every person on the island ran down to the beach and they were all waving to us and that, but we couldn't land because there was no airfield on the island. It's extremely one of the world's most remote islands, and we had no way of communicating with them at all.
The small Cessna aircraft flying above them was the first sign of help these devastated islanders had seen. Mackley released his pictures to the world's media, showing the severity of the situation and the desperate need for aid for the islanders. However, he soon found himself in the middle of a political situation.
I understand that the reason that no aid was forthcoming in any hurry was because there have been ongoing rows with the government of the Solomon Islands. There's been all kinds of corruption. There's been aid money from previous disasters that's gone astray and things like that. And I don't know. It's hard to say. I think it was one of those things that the governments of nearby countries just wanted to hope would, go away. But unfortunately, when I went out there and it became big news all over the world.
On his return to Vanuatu, which had been fortunate enough to miss the devastating cyclone, Mackley began to think of ways to actually land on Tikopia and get some much-needed aid to the devastated islanders.
I got some advice from local people in Vanuatu, just what would the islanders eat. Someone suggested that 2-minute noodles would be the ideal thing to take because they're very lightweight. So I went along to a local shop and bought a whole big truckload of these noodles. The last thing I wanted to do was turn up out there on that island and be the first foreigner, the first person of any kind to arrive on the island and just turn up, take a few pictures and leave.
The only other storm to come close to the ferocity of Cyclone Zoe was Hurricane Mitch that hit Honduras in 1998, which 10,000 people fell victim to. The Tikopia loomed on the horizon. Mackley was fearful of what he would find on the ground.
The whole way out there I expected to find just dead bodies everywhere, which is, what I normally see after this kind of storm. The first question, of course, on my mind was, how many people have died? And they said, well, none. Every single person is alive and well.
It's a miracle. There is no casualties. With the islanders, there is no casualties. It's a very surprising that people survive.
I can't really comprehend what it must have been like for those people. Cyclone Zoe came to an almost complete standstill over the island. So for about 12 hours, they were in the eye wall of the cyclone, which is where the most powerful winds are. They would have had 200-mile-an-hour winds and 30-foot waves destroying all their villages, and they would have had no idea when the mayhem was going to end.
The rescuers couldn't understand how the people of this exposed island could have survived the cyclone.
These people were living in an extremely remote place, and they just did what they've done for centuries, and that is, when the danger comes, move away from it to anywhere they can. Unlike people in the modern world who are trying to save their possessions and this, that and the other, these people live very simple lives. One other big factor too is that during a powerful storm, all these things in the modern world that we take for granted, like buildings and everything, road signs, you name it, all those things become deadly missiles. Well, on this island, about the only deadly missile there would be coconuts falling out of the trees, so and trees falling on people. So by just sheer factor of their simple lifestyle, there were less deadly items flying around.
Even though he had never set foot on the island before, the islanders knew exactly who he was.
The locals had a little shortwave radio and just enough battery power to listen to the BBC World Service, and they were listening to my reports that I was giving as we were flying around the island. They were actually listening to them on the ground. When I landed there in that helicopter, they knew who I was straight away, and I'd never even heard of that place a few days ago. They figured somehow that I was going to be coming back and that I'd turn up before everyone else, and well, that's what did happen.
After Mackley's intervention, the island of Tikopia received much needed aid from neighbouring countries and began the slow process of recovery.
Cyclone Zoe was amazing in that it had a happy ending. Most of these things don't. Most of them, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of destroyed houses, you're seeing dead bodies, all that kind of thing. Complete misery. With these people, there was none of that because they hadn't actually lost anything. It's not like they'd lost their house, their car, anything like that, because they don't have any of those things. They don't need any of those things. They were all completely happy to be alive, and every one of those people just was smiling from ear to ear.
For skiers and climbers, avalanches are a silent killer, difficult to predict and often triggered by the slightest force. The most dangerous type of avalanches are called slab avalanches. These are caused by a weak layer of snow giving way beneath a more stable layer above.
The mountains of New Zealand. Beneath their tranquil beauty lies a place prone to destructive and unpredictable forces. Southern Island represented an ideal getaway from the bustle of city life.
It's got a number of the higher peaks within the Southern Alps of New Zealand, and I guess some of the peaks have a challenge that other areas of New Zealand don't present.
In January 2001, Andrew and Mark weren't quite prepared for the test that the mountain was going to throw at them.
Unknown to the mountaineers, a dangerous slab of snow had formed farther ahead in their climb after a heavy blizzard.
There is a real threat to individuals who venture out into that terrain, mostly through the winter months when we have strong winds and constant snow build-ups on the slopes.
On any climb, it's important to check the weather and I guess to check conditions. We were aware of the snow conditions, but we'd taken a week off, and we decided that, look, let's go and have a look and see how far we got. So we probably went a bit further than we should have.
As Andrew and Mark continued to make their ascent of the mountain, the weather took an unexpected turn for the worst, and before they knew it, the ground beneath their feet gave way. Whilst climbing in the mountains of New Zealand, Andrew Johnson and Mark Flintoff had accidentally triggered a huge avalanche.
I remember Mark saying, the slope, it's giving way, and I remember looking at my feet and thinking, hell, you know, the slope it's completely just disintegrating around our feet. It didn't matter what tools or whatever you put in, it just completely, you know, it was self-destruction at your feet. One moment there's a flurry of snow and, you know, ice axe and everything flying everywhere. It was sort of blue sky, white snow, blue sky, white snow. Then all of a sudden you came to a stop.
In the confusion and panic of the avalanche, Mark was struck in the head by his own ice axe. Andrew survived injury, but soon discovered Mark unconscious.
I was buried up to here, you know, in the snow. So we had to get out and get out of the rope that we were in, get out of our gear and sort of quickly make sure that we were safe, and then we could deal with Mark.
Just take it easy, try not to move too much now. Okay.
Yeah, well, I was quite groggy at the time, but I realised from all the blood around me and stuff that I was in a pretty bad way.
As the weather began to turn, Andrew knew that Mark needed urgent medical attention.
I think shock was starting to set in, and he was starting to shiver, and I was concerned about hypothermia. That was a major worry.
Okay folks, the information we've received so far is that 3 people have been caught in an avalanche. It's on the south face of the Pope's Nose. Okay. Weather is coming in. Alright, okay, so... Right.
Andrew and Mark had informed the mountain service of their intended climb. So a mountain rescue unit was dispatched to search for the stranded climbers.
We received a phone call from the police. It's a police call-out system when anyone's involved in a rescue. The call goes through the police, and then the police will coordinate with the rescue teams. We collected the appropriate equipment and headed off into the location where the avalanche had occurred. We knew we really had one chance at this and had to go for it then.
I could hear the wind blowing. Yeah, it was getting quite strong. Yeah, I was sort of getting a bit concerned that we wouldn't get off before nightfall.
After being stranded for over 8 hours, Andrew got his first glimpse of the mountain rescue team approaching.
When the helicopter arrived, I thought, good. I mean, I was so pleased. I thought, this is great. You know, you just about feel like crying.
Although they had found the climbers, the rescue team were worried about further avalanches.
It's very important that the rescuers check conditions and decide whether it is even actually safe to carry out the rescue.
This is the oxygen mask.
Once conditions were deemed safe to leave the mountain, they quickly prepped Mark for an immediate evacuation.
We knew it was vital that we got in and out fairly fast. Things went very well, and basically we got the people off the mountain as quick as possible, left ourselves on the mountain, and the helicopter returned for us later. That was important, to get the people who needed to be off first.
When you consider that avalanches take about 700 lives each year in Europe alone, Andrew and Mark were incredibly lucky to come through their encounter alive.
Certainly I'll be much more mindful and of avalanche, and certainly exercise the old discretion is a better part of valour.
Natural disasters are often formed by extreme weather patterns, and in the era of global warming, these hazards are becoming more and more frequent. In Australia, these effects, combined with overdevelopment around the bushland, are seeing bushfires rage almost beyond the control of the country's fire service.
For residents like Terry Lake, danger is just around the corner.
As the summer came in, one felt that the conditions were starting to add up to something quite serious. And then, of course, in December, all hell broke loose.
Australia's indigenous bushland can become almost as combustible as petrol due to the oily leaves of the native eucalyptus tree falling onto the ground, creating a highly volatile layer.
It's those fuels that burn the most readily. It's like kindling. Add a spark to it, hot, dry winds, and you have a major problem.
On the 4th of December 2002, residents of New South Wales were as usual put on high alert as a fire broke out.
Fire started in Glenorrhea and took 24 hours to move 40 kilometres from Glenorrhea through to the small community of Barara.
We saw the fire was now building up over in Glenorrhea, and the prevailing winds were such that it was going to bring it over toward us.
Anticipating that the fire was heading straight for their small town of Barara, Terry went into action, lowering his fireproof shutters and dousing his house with water in a bid to protect it.
We steeled ourselves for the experience. We knew we were facing a very serious problem.
Responding on 10638.
The intention was that we were going to put all the fire resources we possibly could into Barara, and firefighters alongside with residents who could defend their properties with swimming pools, water, and any equipment that they could use to defend their properties would make a stand against this fire as it moved towards Barara.
Tonight, 4,500 firefighters are battling 80 blazes across the state. Sydney's major threat remains to the north around Barara, with containment operations.
Desperate times call for desperate measures as residents of Barara used anything they could to fight the fire, including the swimming pools.
The speed and the movement of the fire, I can only describe it as a wild, raging monster tearing its way up the slope to get to us. It made an awful lot of noise and threw out an awful lot of heat. That was scary.
The biggest killer in a bushfire is not the flames and it's not the smoke. It's actually the radiant heat. The heat that a fire can generate can be up to 500 degrees Celsius, 50 metres away from the fire front. If that heat actually hits your bare skin, it will burn you.
But until you actually got into that situation, you didn't realise just what you were about to face. There's smoke and sparks all around you. It's very difficult to even see the person next to you.
After helping to battle the fire for over an hour, Terry and the residents of Barara were becoming overwhelmed with the intensity of the heat.
We felt we couldn't hold out much longer, and then eventually the cavalry arrived in the form of Georgia Peach.
Georgia Peach was a specially designed helicopter used in New South Wales, vital in fighting raging bushfires.
When it comes down to it, your life's more important. The only thing we're going to have back is our cat. I let him out too soon.
It has the capacity to deliver between 7,000 and 9,000 litres of water. It also has the capacity to suck that water from any small dam, creek or river very quickly. It's a very effective firefighting aircraft.
It was a great feeling, you know, to feel that salty water coming down through all that smoke and hearing the fire being quenched a very loud hissing sort of, and eventually you could sort of hear the fire moving away from you.
Terry and the town of Barara had this time protected their homes and lived to fight another day.
Ironically, bushfires serve an important role in the Australian outback. Most of the flora and fauna is renewed through this natural conflagration.
Many, many years ago, the stories are told that Aboriginal people used to go through and light up the bush and burn it out for that very reason, so they could get that regrowth actually occurring. Once a fire has been through these areas, we can expect that we can get 3 or 4 years of no fire activity in that area again. But unfortunately, the trees keep growing and we keep getting leaf litter on the ground, and we keep getting fires. It'll be a natural occurrence in Australia for many years yet.
Called into action again? Possibly, but I hope not for a few years. If that eventuality arises, we'll stand up to it the same way as we stood up to this one.
Active volcanoes are a problem in many parts of the globe, but in the US, eruptions are extremely rare.
In Washington state, on the western coast of the United States, lies one of America's most spectacular national forests. At its center is a beautiful and seemingly benign ancient volcano.
St Helens was a kind of a mountain too that anybody could pretend they were a mountain climber because you could basically walk to the top of it too. You didn't have to have any special mountaineering skills to get to the top.
On May the 18th, 1980, the landscape of Washington's largest national park was about to change forever. The locals knew that Mount St Helens was a volcano, but as the last eruption was over 100 years ago, no one gave it much thought until it started to rumble.
They never had a volcano explode in the 48 states, and it was all new to the scientists. They didn't know what to expect.
After rumbling for 2 months, scientists drew a 5-mile exclusion zone around the peak of Mount St Helens. But local residents still found it hard to believe that the mountain that they cherished was something to dread.
Nothing to be scared of. More danger than one of them trees falling on the backside than there is a mountain of exploding.
It certainly didn't stop Venus Durgan and Roald Whiten from going on their annual fishing trip many miles from the mountain.
We weren't even thinking about the mountain when we went down there, for the record.
I had no idea that we were even close to Mount St Helens.
That Sunday morning at 8:32 a.m., an earth tremor put massive pressure on the cone of Mount St Helens, which took the scientists and the local communities completely by surprise.
There is no question at all that the volcanic activity has begun.
Northwest side is sliding down. We got it, boys. It's coming up over the ridge towards me. I'm going to back out of here.
No one expected the tremor to cause a sudden landslide, as 8,000 million tons of rock went crashing down the side of Mount St Helens. In an instant, the landslide released the pressure inside the mountain, and it quite literally blew. The heat from the explosion melted the surrounding glaciers and created fast-moving mudflows. Venus and Roald didn't know it yet, but Mount St Helens was coming to them.
I think it was probably 8:45 when I woke up, and I looked out, and the sky was pure white. It's hard to explain, like there was a dome over us. And I looked at the creek, the South Fork, and it had come up probably maybe 1.5 feet, and it had small little sticks and stuff, debris floating in it. So I knew something was going on, so I woke Venus up, and I said, "Come on, get up. There's something's wrong. Something's going on with the creek."
The mudflows carried thousands of uprooted trees and stock from local logging companies straight into the couple's path.
Everything just came down on top of us. And that's when it was, we didn't know what to do then. Jump on top of the car, thinking that, nothing's going to move the car.
When it came around and hit the car, then I knew we were in serious trouble and that we were in for the fight of our lives, that we were either going to live or die. That was the choice.
It moved the car immediately. Just picked it up and put it right into the torrent. And it was jump, you know, and I landed on a log and Venus went in between them, and she was gone.
We had a major eruption occurring at 8:32 approximately this morning on Mount St. Helens.
News
It does
spread
appear that the
quickly
northwest
Mount
flank
St.
of the
Helens
mountain
had
seems to
blown.
be gone.
Local communities sprang into action.
I had a 80-year-old neighbor, and she had a scanner going all the time. And she come over, knocked on the door, and she said, "Ray," she said, "the mountain erupted."
They have indicated that there have been some mud flows that come down the southeast flank of the mountain. Emergency procedures have been put into effect.
The mud flows were traveling at around 100 miles per hour. They swept away homes and bridges miles downstream. And by this time, Venus and Ward were fighting for their lives.
There came a point where I was sucked underneath the logs, and the only thing that was left above, my hand was trapped in between two logs. And it was being crushed, and I could feel it being crushed. And at that point, I would say there was a period of darkness. And I remember hearing Roald screaming in the background to hang on. If you ever heard a grown man scream for his life, it gave me so much adrenaline to hear him, because I'd never heard that kind of terror in anybody's voice before.
The Calais County Sheriff's Department contacted our dispatcher and let them know that they had heard voices on the other side of the South Fork of the Toutle. They couldn't get across there because of the mud flow, and wanted to know if we could investigate and see if we could help out.
And the next thing I knew, I felt Roald grab my hand, just as I was underneath all the mud and debris, and I felt him grab my hand, and physically he pulled me up with one yank up on top of the log. How he got to me, I have no clue, because I could not see him, I could only hear him. And somehow at that moment where either my wrist was going to be torn off or I was going to drown, he got to me right at that point. We rode this huge log, we straddled this log just like a horse, huge. I mean, I couldn't even straddle this log, and we just rode the river. It's like the ultimate rafting trip, till the flow started to subside.
Not as badly injured as Venus, but suffering from shock, Roald tried to gain his bearings and find help.
We could hear airplanes and helicopters overhead, all over the place, but they couldn't see us because we were in the dense brush and woods.
Nothing matches the map.
We couldn't find anybody, and we looked on the other side up and down the river, and we couldn't see anything. And so we, let them know we couldn't find anything, so we left.
If we were going to spend the night out there, she would have died.
Yeah, I knew I wasn't going to make it.
Now very concerned about Venus's condition, Roald made desperate attempts to attract the attention of the rescue authorities.
Just screaming and yelling at them, and screaming and yelling and waving a big, I was waving a stick in the air, just to get his attention. They finally saw us.
You could understand why we didn't see them the first time, because they were the same color as the whole mud flow. They'd been intertwined, mixed up in the mud. I just concentrated on hovering while these two gentlemen got out and put Venus in the back seat. She was a tiny little thing, and 16 years old, just scared, and most likely in shock. I'm not a medic or anything, but I know that she was one scared puppy.
And they asked us if we knew what had happened, and we said no, and they said at Mount St. Helens that erupted.
We didn't care.
It didn't make, I was like, what does that have to do with us? You couldn't even see Mount St. Helens from us, and here we were being airlifted out by a helicopter.
It was only now that the extent of Venus's injuries were evident.
They said I had a fractured wrist, and I had lost all the skin from my knuckles all the way to my elbow. I had massive abrasions. I'd lost all the skin off of my face. The mud has silicone in it, which is like glass, so it was embedded in my hair and in my scalp. But I had to go through physical therapy for 3 months. I couldn't walk for the first 2 months.
However, not everyone on the mountain was as lucky as Venus and Roald.
We continued to fly the rest of the day until it got dark, and we found some people that inside the blast zone that didn't make it. I've got a vision of the vehicle with there was two young children in the back of it, and just covered with ash. I can still see that pickup in my mind as we're talking right now.
Mount St Helens lost 1,300 feet from its summit that day. From the power of the eruption, 540 million tons of volcanic ash was sent billowing into the atmosphere. 2 days later, the ash cloud crossed the US, reaching New York City.
57 people died on May the 18th, 1980, the majority of whom were outside the red zone set by the experts. However, the devastation and death toll could have been much, much worse.
If the eruption had occurred on a weekday rather than a Sunday, then there would have been many more people killed because of the hundreds of people that would be working around the forest.
The power of that eruption just makes you appreciate Mother Nature and just how small we are as a part of it.
We just happened to be lucky that day. I think God was looking over both of us that day and decided it wasn't our time to go. That was the only thing that saved us.
Natural disasters are both a blessing and a curse for our planet. The Earth has evolved from a lifeless cauldron through this cycle to the habitable planet of today. But when it still rocks devastation, we can only hope that we're not in its destructive path.